Well, our next guest is a whistleblower who has testified to Congress under oath about what he saw while working at the South Pole. Yes, in Antarctica. Eric Hecker is a former Navy and defense contractor for Raytheon. While working at the South Pole, Eric witnessed some stunning things, including directed energy weapons and other technologies that can trigger earthquakes. Also, intercepted communications. We'll talk about those very special communications. We'll get into all of that. These projects are off the books, highly illegal. Eric's position as a firefighter and plumber for the South Pole facility gave him unrestricted access to the compound. And Eric joins us now. Eric, thank you so much for doing this and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton, so much for having me. I really appreciate the interest and attention that you're giving to this topic. So I'm very happy to be here and answer your questions.
Well, it's our pleasure, and thank you for your bravery in coming forward as a whistleblower to shed light on what has actually been happening at the South Pole. We've heard tangential reports about what's been happening at the South Pole in Antarctica since World War II, but no one with your level of access who's been able to come forward and testify to Congress as to what's been going on there. So thank you for doing that and your bravery. I do want to say that. Can you describe for our audience, let's start there. What was your job at the South Pole Station and when did you start?
Very simple. I was hired as a tradesman. My plumbing expertise, my heating expertise, and then they trained me up to be an industrial firefighter. It was part of the program. They sent me to the training. Those were the protocols. And that's what got me there. It really is that simple. I do understand a lot of people have very harsh criticisms of me in my role in having any knowledge or access. And I'm happy to engage any of these naysayers. I find it to be highly prejudiced that people, for some reason, believe that plumbers and firefighters are inherently unintelligent and can't be that aware of what's going on. And if anybody has seen the congressional hearings recently, even Anastasia Ortiz, whatever her name is, AOC, said that we need to focus a lot harder on the third-party contractors because we are the most informed people with the least amount of restriction on these particular types of facilities. So my role was simply a plumber slash firefighter, and it gained me complete access to the facility.
To protect the facility, and you were there, I believe you started in 2010, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I started in November of 2010, and I ended in November of 2011. My count, to my recollection, was that I spent 366 days straight in Antarctica.
So you were on this base. When did the first alarm bell go off for you that something was afoot here? Was there a moment you said, wait a second, wait a second?
When I applied for the job and found out that it was Raytheon Polar Services as the third-party contractor hiring for the National Science Foundation, that immediately set off red flags and bells whistling in my head because of my short time in the submarine service and my understanding of what Raytheon is doing on this planet. I did not understand. I mean, I come from the trades. I'm very aware of what it takes to do construction and maintain facilities. I find it highly questionable that the only contractors that get the contract to maintain the facility and provide janitorial services always seem to be military industrial contracts weapons makers. So
even
immediately before I even went there, absolutely, I already knew that this is false pretenses.
And when you were there, did anyone tell, while as you were transitioning to move there and go through the paperwork of transporting your life from the continental United States to the South Pole, were you told to keep quiet? Did you have to sign any non-disclosure agreements? Did you have to sign anything that what you were to see there where you would have to keep quiet about?
Absolutely not. And this is what I'm trying to impress upon people, is that the most secreted facilities are presented as normal operations. That's the cover story. It's also that simple. Everybody there is compartmentalized. The vast majority of the people in that facility have no idea what's going on in the room next to them. They stay in their lane.
But because you've had access, unmitigated access to the whole facility as a firefighter and a plumber to make sure that the facility was up to safety standards, you were able to see these different compartments and put these pieces together. When people go there, what do they think this facility is? Like, what are most Americans told this facility is? And then I want to get into what it actually is in a moment.
They're, for the most part, told that it's, for cutting edge science. That, this is our tax dollars at work, and they're looking out into the cosmos and finding star clusters and planets that can be lived on and neutrinos so that we can understand high and low energy systems in our cosmos, neutrinos being the most prevalent molecule out there. So therefore it's worthy of study. All of it is the pretense of studying science. But I think what most people have learned, that our government likes to double dip and triple dip, and just because they stamp the face of the program as something wonderful, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is. Our politicians don't take our money, do something nefarious with it, and then tell us about the nefarious thing. They wrap it up with a pretty bow and call it something to our benefit.
So is this facility a U.S. government facility, or is this a Raytheon facility?
It is a U.S. government facility that Raytheon had the contract for maintenance thereof. And they no longer have the contract. Now it's a different military industrial contractor. I believe it's currently Lockheed Martin. Go figure. They make weapons.
It's such an incestuous bunch. Take your pick.
Yes, absolutely.
Raytheon, yep. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics. They'll trade these contracts back and forth. So they are in charge of the...
Right. I think they take these contracts actually on a loss, because then they gain access to the equipment that they know is there, and that's the secondary mission is where they make their money. They're not making money off of the contract to maintain the facility. It's almost like if they low bid to get the contract, they know they're gaining access to the technology, and that's where they can now make big bucks. I mean, threatening people with an earthquake to make sure they acquiesce to your demands is certainly a valuable weapon.
So we'll get into that, the earthquake piece of this in a second, which is astonishing. So you get to the facility. Raytheon is running security for the facility, basically maintenance and security for the facility. And when did you first learn physically, with your own eyes, that something was afoot here at this facility?
I guess at that point in time, it would have been when I found out that the ELF system is energized. And this is a topic that I get a lot of criticism for from the trolls of the world, because everybody seems to not understand that a plumber is allowed to work with electrical circuits. Plumbers are a lot more multifaceted than people comprehend. So just for clarification on this topic, I learned the ELF system was active when I was told it had been de-energized and was defunct, because I had to change out a pump, which is a plumbing task. I had to replace a pump.
What is the
that
ELF?
Pump has electric.
Can you explain for our audience what the ELF?
Frequency.
What is it?
The ELF is an extreme low frequency antenna array. It is commonly used for submarine communications, but as we're learning, these are multifaceted systems that they're now learning to integrate with other multifaceted systems to accomplish a list of nefarious activities. Weather manipulation, chemtrail control, earthquakes, these are all horrible things that we have to get into our understanding on the list of possibilities. But it was in this particular tasking where I had to de-energize the pump that I was obliged to swap out that I came to the understanding that the ELF system was still, in fact, energized. When I went to the circuit panel to de-energize the pump, I found a breaker that was on, and it was listed for the ELF system. And I at that point, since I had been verbally told that that system was off, now I had questions about this panel and am I de-energizing the right circuit? So it was just a safety concern that I ran up my chain of command, and then I was informed that the ELF circuit is properly labeled, your circuit's properly labeled, get back on task. So I learned at that moment the system's still energized.
Huh.
And that absolutely set off red flags to me because I knew they were lying about that system. And there certainly would have to be a good reason for them to be being deceptive. Um, and I would just want to point out something that you said before, just again for clarification. You said that Raytheon ran the security for the facility. There is no security at the facility. Its location is its security. Nobody's going to the South Pole. You don't need security. It's a logistical impossibility for anybody to get there and do anything to us.
When you testified to Congress, but also in front of the Disclosure Project during Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, you claimed that the station actually operates as a sort of an air traffic control station for UFOs, and that this station has communicated with, quote, exotic craft by sending neutrinos up into space. I know that's a big sentence that I just spat out there. Mm-hmm. Can you explain for me and the rest of us what exactly that means?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I did not ever say that. I never stated that this machine ejects neutrinos. People are taking my words and going a little bit further than what I stated.
Okay.
I stated that it is a neutrino detector that has the ability to transmit. I never stated it's pushing out neutrinos.
Okay, thank you.
I also never stated that. No problem. And I also never stated that we communicated with UFOs. But what I am stating is that we are communicating with our own vehicles that are out in space, that it provides long-range communications for our own fleet of vehicles that was introduced to us by Gary McKinnon, a whistleblower of many years ago.
So it should be clear to our audience, and if anyone new to this topic, we've been covering this part of the story. It's a very important part of the story, that many of the UFO sightings that people are witnessing today, as Dr. Stephen Greer has pointed out and others, that they are not, in fact, ET. They are man-made craft from alien technology, reverse-engineered alien technology. And yes, there are, in fact, ETs and UFOs that are out there, but the predominant number of craft that people are now seeing are the reverse-engineered kind that humans have reverse-engineered from these alien craft. Am I wrong about that, Eric?
I agree with you 1,000%, and I think that's a big part of what is going on in disclosure right now. And this recent push from, I guess you would say, Team Grush, and what they're doing is trying to obfuscate this conversation by acting like the government has no idea what's up there and acting like it's not our own stuff and that from other nation states. They're trying to make it all out like we just discovered that there's UFOs and we're just starting to look into it. And that's a smokescreen for the fact that everybody's aware that it's technology that's been available to specialty factions for decades. That's what they don't want everybody to know. They don't want to know that they've been profiteering and monopolizing off of hiding this technology from we, the people of this planet.
So these air traffic control communications, when you talked about these UFOs, for a lot of people, it would be unidentified because they wouldn't know what the heck it is. But for someone like you who's in the know, these are man-made, reverse-engineered craft that they are able then to communicate through this sort of air traffic control station at the South Pole. And so they are detecting neutrinos and not pushing them out, but detecting neutrinos. And how exactly is this station communicating? And I'm sorry, but the UFOs, these craft, these man-made craft, they're way out in our solar system, right? They're not just hanging out up in the stratosphere.
Absolutely. Correct. That this provides, there's a document that I have on my website, and it discusses how the science behind quantum entangled long-range communication functions. I don't want to sit here and present that I'm an expert on the topic, but I can certainly let people know there are referenceable experts that are discussing not only the possibility, but the probability and how to do this. And I'm just connecting the dots for folks, presenting the information, saying, listen, I've been there. Listen, I know that there's a cover story and a reality, and there's also referenceable information out there to support exactly what I'm saying. I don't have to be, just because I've flown in an airplane doesn't mean that I have to be able to explain to everybody the mechanics of an airplane to then say planes can fly. And that's basically what everybody's throwing at my feet, is if I can't explain every detail of this machine inside and out, as if that takes veracity away from my story. It doesn't in the slightest.
When you
I'm
were
sharing with people my experience, my understanding, and referenceable information that this is what's going on. They're just not doing the legwork and being trolls and discounting.
right, I mean, and no one has time for trolls anyway. But
Right.
so when you were there at the South Pole Station, when did you learn that this neutrino-based technology, what exactly it was doing? What were they
I
were
learned it.
telling
I
you that it
learned
was
it
just looking
years
for
later.
star? Oh, you learned it years later. So when you were
I
there,
learned it
you didn't know.
years later. A lot of the stuff that I absorbed, it took me years to interpret what my experience was. A lot of this, I knew at the time I was being lied to, but it took a lot of legwork and effort to figure out what was going on. Many years after the fact, I was communicating with folks from my crew who are negatively impacted from the technologies we were exposed to in a, I would just say, in a medical capacity. These people do not want to come forwards themselves. They are, HIPAA protected. They have every right to their own privacy. Okay.
Right.
But in that conversation with former crew members, they came to me and divulged they were suffering illnesses, and they wanted to know if I was in the same boat as them, that
Can
we
you
were
talk
now
about these
talking to each
illnesses?
other.
I've heard sort of Havana
Havana syndrome, like,
syndrome. Yeah, what is that?
correct. There's mental degradation, mental, complexities. They're kind of vague terms to begin with. And for the most part, it just starts to make you sound like a crazy person to other people. But again, this is the technology that exists to induce these symptoms in people. Um, Hearing voices, things like that. It's, I guess, almost similar to Alzheimer's in a way.
Or
That
even like a
they can just,
schizophrenia, like like you're
yeah,
hearing voices.
fatigue. A lot of
Mhm.
fatigue, skin issues, and everybody just seems to be showing up with the same list of symptoms that fits the bill for Havana syndrome. So it was in this conversation that I had a coworker come to me with concerns, and I expressed that I already know a lot of oddity was going on, and it sounds like you're holding back information from me. And I basically said, if you want to continue this conversation, you're going to be straight with me about what was really going on. And it was at this point that I had a former crew member express to me their direct firsthand experience and the direction to now take my research to connect the dots. And I did just that. So there's technical information that's available about the ice cube neutrino detector that proves that it can transmit, and people can thumb their nose at it all they want, but the documentation exists. The firsthand experience confirmation states the same. And all I can do is present this information for the betterment of humanity, for them to understand that there is high technology being used against them every single day.
So directed energy weapons. And I've had a lot of viewers actually who've written to me wanting us to cover Havana syndrome and the effects of this. And you described it as basically like this machinery can plant voices in your head. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more and what that means?
Absolutely. This is a very powerful tool. So imagine yourself, Clayton, that there's a point in your life where you have a decision to make. I do this all the time, where all of a sudden, like, I have considerations about what direction I'm going to go. And at that point in time, it's like you have multiple voices of yourself in your own head having a conversation about what should I do next. Now imagine if I had the power to copy your voice and insert another aspect of you into the same conversation. But now I control what that voice says, and you receive it as just part of this inner dialogue. Now, people can make that voice say whatever they want. What if they can do two of them? What if they're very repetitive? I mean, it's no different than the television at that point, but it's a direct stream into your head that you can't turn off. And we already see how powerful the programming of the television is. By just simply repetitive information, this is what the Nazis learned: is if you just keep repeating something enough, you can convince somebody of anything. And if you have direct access into someone's head and their own voice, this is an extremely powerful and dangerous circumstance when we learn that they can do it to individuals on a very personalized level, and then they can blanket a whole area and do this on a massive, wide, directly personal level, because this is what they're producing AI algorithms for. This is what they're gathering on all of the information that they're bringing in. There's no reason for them to gather metadata if they're not running it through AI. There's no reason to have AI if you don't have metadata. Well, what are they doing with all of this stuff? Certainly not just considering selling us cheeseburgers from McDonald's. There's a lot more going on.
How did you learn that this is? How did you learn that this is what this machine was doing?
Through my research and understanding of what is potentially capable. It's just a matter, you have to do due diligence, folks. Nobody's going to sit and give you all of the information, because the only thing that happens is people just start trying to discount because they haven't done the work. If they haven't walked the path that I've walked, they're not going to have the understanding that I have. If they're not going to read the books that I read, they're not going to have the understanding that I have. I come to these conclusions because I've spent years of researching and understanding what is possible and what is probable. As far as the earthquake device goes, there's a gentleman out there named Dutch Sins who's got a YouTube channel, which basically he's been screaming from the mountaintops for years that there's some sort of energy device in Antarctica that's blasting out earthquake beams. All I'm doing is showing up years later and confirming that, yes, this stuff seems to be legitimate technology that exists.
Now, you were there in your testimony at the Disclosure Project. You talked about, I think, being there at the time when it was turned on for the first time or the second time, I forget exactly, and almost at the exact same time, a massive earthquake was triggered. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely, that is correct. The ice cube neutrino detector and the elevated station, as titled, both went from construction to operations and maintenance the season that I was there. And yes, you are correct. When the ice cube neutrino detector first fired up, it was twice that it struck Christchurch, New Zealand. I was initially told that these were accidental misfires as they were trying to dial it in. And I did believe that for quite a few years, that, A, that the device did do this, and B, that it was an accident. But I'm starting to gather more info that seems like it was much less of an accident, that might be the part that I was misinformed on.
And you were told that it specifically hit Christchurch, like that it was the waves of, I don't know exactly how this works, particles or the waves of it had struck Christchurch, New Zealand, and that was...
Yes.
Now you may think the intended target, but they confirmed to you that it did in fact hit Christchurch, right?
Absolutely, yes. That I was read into the startup, and I was told that everybody there was present and aware that what they were doing was manufacturing an earthquake for delivery. But I was told that they at the time it was an accident that it hit Christchurch twice. And everybody says that lots of times when these agents, these spooks give out information, they give partial truths and then some lies. So I think the true part was, yes, we have a earthquake generating device. And I think now the lie in the conversation was that it was an accident.
You have to dig into like what the motivation would have been there for New Zealand. And, at least in some of these cases now, it seems in a lot of these cases whether it's COVID or 9/11 or some where you have families who are fighting for answers from the court system about what actually killed their son or daughter, whether it's at the North Tower or otherwise. And it seems like going through the court system could actually provide some answers. And maybe there are people in Christchurch who would have the wherewithal, learning this information, to come forward and maybe take it through the court system to get some answers. Maybe we would actually learn something that way. I just want to plant that bug out there. We have a lot of people in New Zealand who watch our show. So if anyone was affected by it, who maybe speaks to some New Zealand lawyers and takes it to the next step. That would be a fascinating move. So we have this earthquake piece of the story, which is unbelievable, but then also from what I understand, the intercepting of communications from ET craft or extraterrestrial craft. Can you talk about if we're treating this station as an air traffic control station, and we're communicating with our advanced craft way out in the solar system, then that stands to reason there would be some sort of communication interception from extraterrestrial craft. Can you talk about that, or am I way off base on that?
I would not say that you are way off base. I never covered anything about intercepting communications, although I agree with you in the possibility of that. There's nothing in my experience so far or research that suggests that yet, but I'm not opposed to the possibility. What I was getting at with the UFOs and the neutrino detector and it being an air traffic control station still is that it can intercept their location. So in regards to being air traffic control station for our vehicles and anything off-world that has a similar exotic propulsion system. So just because we reverse engineered it and we use it and we can track our stuff, I think similarly, this system is being used to pay attention to off-world vehicles as well. Granted, I do think the majority of what we are seeing is man-made stuff that's just being withheld. There is certainly a capacity for there to be off-world stuff coming and going, and this would be a system that would be able to observe those activities.
Is this same technology being used in satellite systems, to your knowledge? The same that is found at the South Pole Station being used out in the out in the satellites?
Not to my knowledge.
I understand that a senior official who oversees the black budget and all three of the letter agencies for the Senate Intelligence Committee had no knowledge of these at the South Pole Station. Do you know anything about that?
I believe that everybody that I spoke to in the SCIFs, the secret compartmented information facilities, was blown away at the information that I was presenting them. They were thoroughly floored when I was telling them what I knew. I was presenting them my documentation, and it seemed like they legitimately were unaware of what is going on. So if they didn't know, if these are the people that bring in aggregate information for the higher ups to have an understanding, they certainly were presenting to me as being extremely ignorant on the topic. When I was discussing what was going on, they were rapidly absorbing and appreciating and understanding what was being presented, but they were floored at this level of activity that was unbeknownst to them.
How many people work at this base?
So in the summer season that I was there in 2010, because we were at massive levels of construction, we were at almost maximum capacity, near 280 personnel for the summer season. And in the winter season, we had reduced down to 49.
How many people?
Kind of standard.
Yeah. How many people would you say had unfettered access like you did on a regular basis?
Maybe 3.
And no one else has come forward. And you felt compelled to come forward because of the illegal activity that's being carried out by this defense industrial complex. What was the moment when you decided I need to tell the American people, the rest of the world, about what's happening there? What compelled you to do that?
I think when I started understanding the negative impact to my crew, and I started realizing that we were used and abused, so to say, as the technology was just moving forwards. And then I started to understand that it wasn't just us that was being negatively impacted. When I started to have a comprehension of what these machines can do, I just simply felt obliged that this is not something that should be hidden from everybody. This should be discussed. And I felt that I literally the only person that walked this path of understanding. So I appreciate when people say I'm brave for doing this, but from my perspective, I'm just obliged. I have to do this because no one else has this information, literally. I was there with 49 people. One of the people that was there that went with me to DC to testify, to support what I was saying in the skiffs, was a former coworker who spent the winter with me at the South Pole Station. This coworker had previously spent many seasons working at McMurdo Station. She is also a veritable expert on Antarctica information. And what she testified to at both of these skiffs was that I did have unfettered access to everything. A lot of people like to question and discount and saying, who is this guy? How? Well, I did. And that was corroborated by someone who was there with me. What she also corroborated was how compartmentalized everything was and how ignorant everybody was to what was really going on, including her. So now she has been brought up to speed with all of my experiences, all of my research. She now has the same understanding as I do because I basically helped bring her along to that level of understanding. And she testified in both of these skiffs that yes, everything's extremely compartmentalized. All these people are very ego stroked. So when you say what's going on there, what's really going on is you have a whole bunch of compartments of scientists that are told you're very important. Your project is the most important project, and everyone is here to support you. Well, being a plumber, I'm not really put in a position where my ego gets stroked much, and I am oftentimes considered low-level labor, and people would treat me that way. I would walk into a room and just basically be like, hey, scientist, tell me about all your smarty pants stuff that you're doing in here. And they would pontificate about how amazing they are, how amazing their project is, and yet they would have no idea what's going on in the room next to them, and their ego didn't allow them to ask any questions because they figured that was a lesser project. But I would go from room to room and inquire and learn and get a much bigger bird's eye view of what's going on in the facility, and it is that simple.
Have any of these other scientists come forward or felt
Negative.
like that they've learned what was actually going on there and they felt compelled to come forward? Like, hey, we were being used while we were there. We didn't know it.
I would say that there are other crew hands that I've engaged this conversation with, and yes, they agree. But to the specificity of the scientists, I would say no. They have too big of an ego and too limited of an understanding of things.
One of the things that I've been fascinated by with Antarctica for many, many years is the idea of Antarctica being a home to these alien craft or reverse engineered craft, large, massive. There's been multiple reports of massive underground cities warmed by geothermal heat, 75 degrees, massive, massive caverns. Just, you don't have to take my word for it. Look at the purported battles that took place in 1947 after World War II. Why was the U.S. Navy engaged in battles at the South Pole? Look into that if you want more information about it. But while you were there, you're a former Navy man. Were you curious, or did you learn anything about other bases there, or perhaps underground caverns or craft that were being kept there, or were you sort of isolated on that base?
I was extremely isolated on that base. And towards this question, I would say while I was there, I didn't learn anything of the undergrounds and the specifics that you mentioned. I just understood the possibility. I was given, I guess, more insight to the subglacial structure and how it functions between the bottom of the ice where it meets the land, and that there were opportunities for geothermals, like you said. It was only post Antarctic ice time for me that information has come out that discusses that there are massive riverways that would tolerate exactly what you're saying. So if you have glacial melt or geothermal venting, there is the existence of massive rivers down at the point where the ice meets the land, and because of the temperature differences, yes, that would carve out that lower area subglacially and allow for caverns and temperature fluctuations. It is completely known now. And when I discussed with John Warner IV some of the information that his father, former senator, former secretary of the Navy, before he died, he asked his father, what's going on in Antarctica, and he said that there was submarine activities and that they were getting down and making tunnels, but in reality, they could also just access these under ice rivers that would be, above sea level, so to say, below ice level, but would be an intermediary zone that they would be able to access. And he asked his father what was the purpose of the submarine operations down there, and he said, space operations.
And that's been a big question. Can you have submarines that could evade detection and go right into the South Pole, into these sort of underground caverns? There's been many reports about the movement out of Germany after World War II of a large contingency of members of the Third Reich having been positioned at the South Pole Station, as well as in Argentina, which has well been documented. But being able to hide submarines in these massive underground caverns, does that sound like it's a possibility?
I think it's highly probable. A lot of people have suggested that what I'm discussing for equipment operating at the South Pole facility would take more power to operate than the CAT generators that we are running that supposedly provide the power to the whole facility. And I would agree with them. I do believe that there's some sort of other power source, and taking all of this into consideration and connecting all of the dots, I believe it's highly probable that they simply drive a submarine through some sort of a tunnel to get beneath the South Pole Station and then connect that nuclear power supply up, that they might just alternate and rotate boats through. I believe it's highly probable, since the ice cube neutrino detector array and what we call the ice cube drillers had the hardware and technology to drill from the surface 2 miles down to get to the actual land mass of Antarctica and or what would be said river systems. I don't think it's improbable at all that they would simply drop a cable down, connect to the submarine, and now have their power supply for all the nefarious equipment. I think this is just simply crossing the T's and dotting the I's in the story of what these nefarious factions are up to, in the shadows.
Operating with this incredibly dangerous, illegal equipment that members of Congress, members of our intelligence community, at least at a certain level, have no idea is happening at the South Pole. But thanks to your testimony and others, they are finally getting information about these projects. I'll get you out of here on this, Eric, which is, what do you hope your testimony accomplishes? What do you hope that your story accomplishes with these off-the-books black budget projects?
I want people to understand that this technology exists. I believe that an understanding of that will allow them to then consider what people may be using them for. If they don't first understand that this technology is real, then they can't even go with the rest of the conversation. They're not going to believe that there's evil people that would use it for evil purposes if they can't first understand this technology is real. And it's the first step in this is to just be aware that this stuff's been around for a very long time. Nikola Tesla was a genius and ahead of his time for the masses. They didn't allow his technology out to the masses, but there were absolutely people at that time period that knew exactly what he was saying was true, and they started working it in their own factions, in their own circles, with greed and for profiteering, and they monopolized these technologies. Everybody says, well, if this stuff existed, why wouldn't they let us know, and why wouldn't they sell it to us? They'd make so much money. They make more money by monopolizing it.
Well, absolutely.
This is what Michael Herrera was getting at, that they're smuggling drugs, they're smuggling humans, they're smuggling children, right? This is a very lucrative technology to withhold from everybody. If you can make an earthquake and then go in under the false pretenses of helping people, all of a sudden a whole bunch of people go disappearing. It's just business for very nefarious people. So people need to understand these technologies exist and they're being used against we the people of this planet. They're being used against our children. What's anybody out there know what the price of a child is? How much money can you make when you sell a kid? And that's the motive.
Well, we've just been covering that story specifically. I actually happen to know the numbers on that, and it's
damn it,
billions of dollars.
Right. There you go.
Just one to the organ harvesting that's been happening, just to sell a kidney, $30,000 for a kidney.
Right.
This is happening, and it's one of the most lucrative
Yes.
businesses in the world. And when you connect the dots in a
Yes.
way that I hadn't seen, Eric, I want to thank you for this, because I had not drawn the connection between intentional earthquake machine and then also the use of craft. And we know that going into war zones and earthquake, famine zones, typhoon zones is highly lucrative for organ harvesting and human trafficking. And I know for some people, watching this right now, they might say, that sounds like absolute crazy talk. Well, the numbers bear it out. And you don't have to ask me, just do your own research. In fact, the United Nations, the U.S. State Department specifically talks about this on their website. So you don't have to just take it from me. These war zones, earthquake zones are highly lucrative for human body harvesting and those types of things. And so I hadn't drawn the connection between using this technology in that way and then having the craft on the back end to do this. I know this sounds really far-fetched for some people.
This is Hegelian dialectic 101. Problem, reaction, solution. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. They create the problem, and they already know the solution. So they slam an earthquake into a place, and then they have all the rescue teams that are going to come help everyone.
Right.
And then
where do these
and
people
I know
disappear?
what really is going on.
Yeah. These people disappear.
There's money being made.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, Eric. And I hadn't thought of that part of the story and that connection. But thank you for uncovering that for us. And I'd love to have you back on the show. What I'd love to do is, in the comments section, be respectful and ask questions that maybe we didn't ask here. And I'd love to have Eric come back on, and we'll answer some of those questions in the comments section, specifically about Antarctica or some of the technologies you may or may not have seen, your understanding of it. And I'd love to do a follow-up with you here on the show.
I would really enjoy that. I appreciate all of the effort you're putting into this topic. I don't think the world is discussing this enough. So I really thank you for having me on, and I would love to come back.
My pleasure. My guest has been Eric Hecker. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.